Drake sipped the slightly bitter, stringent tea from his tin cup, with a small, relaxed smile as he watched Miranda and Barney chase each other across the courtyard. Like every other day, the clashing of steel, the muffled reports of gunfire, and the light chatter of his fellow freed slaves filled the air. It was a peaceful foreshadowing of the battles to come. Truth be told, Drake could get used to this. But still, he thought, taking another pensive pull of tea, that something was missing. The sudden, ear-splitting sound of trumpets made him flinch and spill boiling hot tea down his front. He cursed angrily as he pulled his soaked shirt front away from his chest, skin still tingling from the heat. The trumpets continued as he began furiously marching towards the front gates, leaving his sword propped up against the bench he'd been sitting on. Miranda was sitting in the grass, hands clamped over her ears as he marched past. A very irritated Barney jumping, screeching, and slashing his claws at the offending noise. The trumpets only grew in intensity as Drake grabbed the large latch handle and rotated it 90 degrees before slamming the 6-inch thick Durasteel gate open so hard it rattled on its tracks. The trumpets stopped as a procession of a couple hundred Geknosions in frilly, colorful, and resplendent robes looked at Drake in utter astonishment, and not a small amount of fear. However, to his surprise, none of them brandished or carried a weapon, including the royally dressed house slave that lifted a bejeweled hand with a flourish and beckoned one of the trumpeters forward. The trumpeter took a deep breath to blow on the brass horn in their clawed hands, the end practically in Drake's face, only for Drake's hand to shoot out and clamp around the trumpet, just behind where the tube flared out. With the sound of squealing metal and a dying note, he crushed the trumpet closed before letting go and growling, "Don't you dare!" Then composing himself as best he could, turned to the house slave and did his best to keep his hands at his sides instead of around the traitor's throat. "What do you want?" The house slave smiled with mock humility before sweeping into a low bow. Drake had the sudden urge to knee him in the face as the opportunity presented itself, but held off. He could see the news reporter at the back trying to make themselves invisible. The house slave finally spoke after staring at Drake's boots for a solid 10 seconds. "I am Clavdos de Finial da Duskin Felerian Clintos Galvaros O'Willy Otervan III, and I come bearing a message from his royal immortality, his regal infinity, breaker of souls and subjugator of species, his Majesty, Monarch Divin Aleostros." Drake stared, unamused at the messenger as they stopped bowing, and held out a finely manicured hand of thick, stubby fingers. A Geknosion in what looked like a jester's garb ran forward, and placed an ornate scroll on the pudgy house slave's outstretched hand. Drake crossed his arms and tapped his foot impatiently, as the messenger unrolled the scroll with at least a dozen flourishes, before clearing their throat for a maddeningly long time. Adopting a far too regal tone, the messenger began reading from the scroll. "I, your gracious and eternal monarch, have found it within myself to bless the rebellious troublemaker, known only as Drake, with a personal audience for a chance to discuss the chance for peaceful proceedings. Along with myself, there will also be the general of my mercenary forces, Gomon. Should you wish to accept my generous offer, arrive at the castle grounds unarmed and wearing proper attire at noon tomorrow." The house slave then quickly rolled the scroll back up, giving Drake what they must have assumed was a confident smile. It only made Drake want to remove a few teeth from that grin. Drake took a deep breath, mulling it over for a minute before abruptly turning his head to the side and asking, "Think I should accept?" Cassius faded into view with a dutiful nod that Drake reciprocated. Turning back to the house slave, Drake stated, "Tell the eternal douchebag I'll meet with him, but I'm not coming unarmed. Beyond these walls, my blade will not leave my side." The house slave began to scoff and balk, but all Drake had to do was take a quick, threatening step towards him, and the house slave visibly paled before shutting up. "That's what I thought. Now leave before I decide to revoke your living privileges." The house slave nodded and began to signal towards the trumpeters, with a bejeweled hand. "Silently!" Drake bellowed, with a soul-powered shout that shook the ground, and made the trumpeters and house slave jump, before silently marching away, ranks collapsing inward into a proper royal procession. Drake growled frustratedly as he closed the gate, Destrier and Remen waiting for him on the other side. "You really think it's a good idea to meet the monarch? Alone at that?" Drake shook his head and began to laugh stressfully at Remen's question. "Absolutely fucking not!" Drake sighed. But it's probably our best chance to get a look at what kind of security measures the monarch might have. And he's handing it right to us. Besides, I won't be going alone." Drake nudged the invisible Cassius with his elbow. "I'll have a silent specter following my every step." Drake finished buttoning the deep black tuxedo jacket with a deep sigh as he gazed at himself in the mirror. Dark hair combed back, scarred face clean, teeth brushed, and bright green eyes shining with defiance. The suit was a simple 5-piece ensemble, consisting of black slacks, a void black dress shirt, a smoke gray vest, blood red bow tie, and void black jacket with shiny black buttons that had been embossed with an image of a crossed sword and scythe. It was also ridiculously uncomfortable and hindered his movements. Grabbing his old clothes, he hucked them into a laundry basket before exiting the small dressing room. Martha gave him a cheeky grin as he fiddled with the skull-shaped cufflinks at the end of his sleeves. "Looking good, Mr. I don't wear fancy clothes. Won't even need your sword to knock 'em dead." Drake sighed and picked up the new sword belt that Martha had made specifically for this outfit. The matte, charcoal black leather was tastefully sewn into a much less cumbersome form than the one he normally wore. Buckling it around his waist, he grabbed his sword from its scabbard and slid it into the decorative leather sheath at his hip. He still had a few hours before he needed to arrive at the castle, but it was going to be a long walk in the monkey suit he was currently wearing. Sitting in a rough-hewn wooden chair, he pulled on a pair of brand-new, shiny black boots and laced them up before blousing the slacks over them. Popping his stiff neck, he glanced at Cassius, who was wearing a special skin-tight jumpsuit that interfaced with his bionic skin to, hopefully, make him completely invisible to thermal and infrared sensors. "You're ready to go? We have a long walk ahead." Cassius nervously nodded, hands shaking, eyes staring through the floor. Drake frowned sympathetically and got up. Walking over, he knelt in front of Cassius and took the young man's shaking hands in his own heavily scarred ones. Cassius looked blankly up at him. Drake knew that look well. It was the same face he put on when memories of his parents' execution caught him off guard. "I know you're scared, and I know I'm asking a lot of you here, Cassius, but I need you to be brave for me, all right? They're going to be so focused on me and what I might do that I doubt they're going to notice that I brought a friend. You just need to get an idea of the security systems, number of guards, and if you can, the building's layout. If it gets scary, just run. Information can be gathered at another time. You got me?" Cassius's eyes grew less distant, and he nodded firmly, giving Drake's hand a squeeze and leaning forward a bit. Drake nodded and gave him a tight hug, patting his back softly to reassure him. Cassius had been trying to hide it more lately, but Drake could tell that something was plaguing his friend's mind. He didn't know what it was, but he knew he needed to be there for him. He gently let the embrace go and stood, pulling Cassius to his feet at the same time. "Let's get going, Cassie. A walk'll clear your head." Drake moved towards the door, but Martha suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, I almost forgot," before jumping up and jogging over to the bag she'd brought his new suit in. She pulled out a small, whitish-colored, snub-nosed revolver and checked the cylinder before tossing it his way. Drake caught the impossibly light firearm and looked at it skeptically. "Is this made out of IM polymer?" She nodded and pointed out. "Yes, so are the cartridges. It won't show up on X-ray or other detection methods, so you should be able to sneak it into the castle, no issue." Drake nodded and flicked the cylinder open. It only had 5 rounds of capacity. Hopefully, he wouldn't need it. He gave Martha a soft smile and slipped it into a specially sewn pocket on the inside of his suit jacket. "Thanks, Mar. Never know when you'll need a gun. With an encouraging smile at Cassius, he threw his arm around his friend's shoulder and led him out of the room. Something nagged at the back of his mind, however. A little voice that said he'd need all 5 of the rounds in that revolver. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe, just maybe, it was a premonition.